Here's what we're working with. There's light damage, but the top is solid wood, which is great to see. Knowing that helped me decide to sand down to raw wood on the tops.
First thing I did was remove all the drawers.
Next, I removed the hardware and gave everything a deep clean using Fusion's TSP alternative mixed up in a spray bottle. Cleaning thoroughly before sanding is a must. And don't forget, the insides can be really dirty too. The tops are pretty shiny, so I decided to wipe them down with some acetone to try to get rid of a little bit of that sheen and finish. You can see it dulled it a bit when I compare to the other one that's not done yet. Then I switched to a inexpensive 80 grit sandpaper. Didn't do a lot, it clogged up pretty quickly, so I moved on to my carbide scraper, and that's where I started to make some progress. I wiped that all down with acetone again, and then got a higher quality 80 grit sandpaper and used that, which was able to break through the finish. In addition to sanding the tops down with 80 grit, I needed to sand the edges of the tops down. But I also wanted to make sure that I didn't do any unnecessary damage, given I'm using 80 grit. So I put on my foam sanding pad and just slightly turned down the speed of the sander. And then I went around and was a bit more confident in sanding down all of the edges. I then moved on to 120 grit sandpaper, again, a good quality sandpaper. I went back over everything and it removed a little bit more just of the dark stained areas still. At this point, I moved on to filler. So first up is to fill the old hardware holes. My go-to process is Bondo first. Mix it up. It's a 2-part filler. So just use what you need and then apply it to the holes. Let it start to dry and harden. But before it's completely hardened, I scrape it back. Then I apply a wood filler. My favorite is Fama wood, and I put that over top for a smooth finish. I then also use the wood filler to fill some of the damage on the sides and the base and any other area of the nightstands. While the filler was drying, I went back over the tops with a 180 grit sandpaper. Again, using the foam sanding pad and a lower speed on the edges. Went back in, did a little hand sanding to the areas that were difficult to get to. Just wanted to make sure that the entire surface was scuffed up and any damage was sanded out or sanded over in terms of the wood filler. Back to the drawers, sanding them down with 180 grit. And then finally going back over the tops, the raw wood areas that I'm going to be staining with 180 grit again, but this time hand sanding, just to make sure that I don't have any swirl marks. And finally, one more coat of acetone, just to wipe everything back. And this also gives you a good idea of what color the wood would be if you just did a natural finish. I used the acetone just to wipe everything off and make sure it was super clean. Then everything got wiped down with a tack cloth just to make sure that I didn't have any fine little bits of dust or anything left over. And I taped off the edges where I want to ensure I don't get primer or paint. And in order to seal the tape, what I do is just put a little bit of water on a microfiber cloth and run it along the edge. I'm now using clear shellac primer. And I'm doing this because some of the areas that I sanded went down to raw wood, even in the areas that are going to get painted. And I find that the shellac makes sure that I have a nice even surface. I keep my roller in the freezer so that I don't have to throw it away every time. And then I'm just going over the entire nightstands and drawers with this clear shellac using a foam roller. Shellac over top of the filled hardware holes is also a key step in the process to make sure that they are smooth and not visible when you add paint. After the shellac had dried, I just went back over, and where I had any sort of little bumps of excess shellac, I just did a light scuff sand. And once that was done, I just used my spray bottle full of water again and my microfiber cloth to wipe it off once more. So while I could move on to paint now, I decided to prime once again, this time using my favorite black primer, giving it a nice stir. I also use a foam roller for this, but that's not necessary. You can clean this up nice and easily because it is water-based. So I just used my regular paintbrush. And like I said, I do use a foam roller, but that's not really required. I just like how it goes on. You're seeing a bit of my technique here. I always do one last rollover with the brush to try to get that even finish. So cutting in to all of the edges, or nooks and crannies as I like to call them, with my brush, and then rolling everything that I can with the roller. And in some cases, I just use the roller as well to go back over the areas that I used the brush on, just to make sure that I have, again, as smooth a surface as possible. With the coat of primer on, it's actually a really good time to drill hardware holes before you paint. So measure, use this little punch to mark the middle, and then drill the hole. Now it's time for paint, and I decided to mix a custom paint color with some of the paints that I had on hand. And it turned out much lighter than intended, so I needed to go buy more paint. And I ended up mixing quite a bit. I believe it was about 4 parts of black with 1 part of light agreeable gray, and that made a color similar to, but a little cooler than, iron ore. Now I'm using a Stallmeister brush, and I actually don't use this often. I forgot how much I like it. And a microfiber roller, same technique as you saw with the primer, going all the way over and into the edges, and then back over with the roller. What you can see here is I'm about to tilt up the nightstand so that I can paint the bottoms. Sometimes I put it on little risers, but I also find that tilting it upwards works as well. Again, you can see the technique, cutting in and then going back over with the roller, ensuring a smooth finish. And just don't use too much paint. That's what causes drips and areas to just not look quite as good. Once the first coat was dry, I went back in with my second coat, and that's actually all it needs when it's a dark color like this, is just 2 coats. With the second coat of paint done, it was now time to stain, and I am using a dark walnut stain from Fusion Stain and Finishing Oil line, which means it is a stain and top coat all in one. I apply it with a chip brush, make sure it's all evenly applied, and then I let it sit for about 10 minutes in this case. After that, I grabbed one of my blue shop towels and used that to wipe the stain back. Now, in all honesty, given this is laminated birch, I ideally should have used a pre-stain conditioner, but I forgot. I got too excited about the stain. So I found that it was a tiny bit blotchy, and I Went back over with a natural stain and finishing oil because I didn't want to darken the color. I just wanted to even things out a little bit, and the added layer just gives a little bit more durability and protection. Now, with all of that done, it is time for choosing hardware and drawer liners. You're seeing some of my storage solutions here, and I'm grabbing a brass knob and a fun fish print wallpaper to use inside the drawers. This is not peel and stick wallpaper, so I will be using a spray adhesive to adhere it. Not all wallpapers are actually the same width, so just make sure that you're getting something that you're not going to have to piece together and something where the pattern will make sense the direction that you need to lay it. I'm using my Olfa cutter and rotary mat and just making sure that I trim it to the right size and that I don't sort of cut off any of the patterns. Once I do one piece, I always just make sure that it's going to fit by dry fitting it before I cut the rest. With the liner all cut, I wiped the bottoms of the drawers with a tap cloth, then used my spray adhesive on the drawers and on the wallpaper, making sure to get right into the corners. Once it's been applied to both surfaces, I set it in place, and then I will use my microfiber cloth just to ensure it's adhered and there's a nice smooth surface. Before I actually work on the lining of the drawers like this, I put the nightstands in place against the staging wall because they're easier to move when they're not full of drawers. And I also make sure I use beeswax finish on the wood drawer guides. And the reason for this is because it can help them to slide a little bit more smoothly. They can get a bit sticky over time. So the hardware is going on now. The drawers are all back in place, and it's really starting to come together. I used a little bit more beeswax on the drawers, and then it was staging time. I chose to stage these quite simply with items from around my home. Let's take one last look at the before. Hard to believe these are the same nightstands. Some scratches, some areas that needed some love, and now they're modern, they're elevated, they're bold, they're ready for a whole new life. We're starting with the original hardware. It's classic, but not the look we're going for. So everything comes off so we can prep for a cleaner, more modern update. Next up, we're removing the ornate trim. This base molding really dated the piece, so I carefully pried all of it off to simplify the silhouette. A good cleaning is essential before any sanding or filling, so I'm using Fusion TSP Alternative to remove the grime. I put on all of my safety gear and then got started doing a scuff sand on the base and the drawers. This helps the primer and paint to adhere properly. You don't need to go to bare wood here, just enough to dull the surface. Because there's some intricate details on the legs, I used my foam pad underneath the sandpaper and reduced the speed just a little bit. While I was scuff sanding, I spotted a small area on the side that needed some filler, so I patched it and then came back to sand it smooth once it had dried. I tried QCS finish remover on the tops to start the process of stripping down to raw wood. This helped a little bit, but then I ended up needing to use my carbide scraper, and I used some mineral spirit to wipe that back, and some steel wool along the edges as well. It all removed a little bit of the finish to help with the sanding. Not sure I'd do it this way again though. While the tops dried, I filled the original hardware holes with Bondo. This gave me the flexibility to install new knobs and an updated placement. After sanding back the Bondo, I also used a DAP filler over top just to really smooth things out, and scuff sanded that back as well. Once the tops were dry, I began the process of sanding them right down to raw wood. Given this is veneer, I started with 120 grit sandpaper and finished with 180 grit. Wiping down with mineral spirits at this point gave me a good idea of what the difference would be in the two wood tones, the veneer on top and the solid wood edges. Similar, but quite different. Not a match. You can see I sanded a little bit through the veneer as well. At this point, I applied a custom paint wash on the lighter trim tone on the edges. I didn't measure, but I'd say maybe 1 part paint to 3 parts of water. I used an Algonquin and hazelwood combination for the paint. And then you can see I also just went in a little bit to the areas where I had sanded through the veneer on the edges of the top. After the paint wash had dried, I used an American walnut stain with a bit of a red undertone over top of the paint wash. May look odd, but this is going to actually help us even out these wood tones because the top has a lot more red in it. I then taped off and primed everything using my favorite black water-based primer. This step is a key for a smooth and durable finish. To tie the wood tones together, I added the same subtle gray beige paint wash to the veneer on the tops as I did to the edges of the tops. You can see I wet the surface first just to make it easier for the wash to spread out, and then applied it with a foam brush. And then I actually moved to a blue shop towel to spread it around. And once that was done, we had a pretty good match. The base and the drawers of the nightstands all got 2 coats of black paint. I used Sherwin-Williams urethane trim enamel in a tricorn black with a satin finish. I find this is a smooth, durable finish, and it actually does not need a top coat. Don't always paint my nightstands upside down. I know this is a little unusual, but I thought that this was the best way to not get paint on the top edges because I had already finished them. I used the brush to cut in and then the roller for the flat surfaces, going back over it with just nice even strokes to make sure that we have a nice smooth even finish. Next, I grabbed some Varathane Diamond Wood Finish in satin. This is a durable water-based finish that won't yellow over time, and I apply it using an applicator sponge. I let it dry between coats and applied a total of 3 coats to the tops of these nightstands for some really good durability. This Yellow Frog tape is a little bit more on the expensive side. I really prefer it though because it leaves such a nice clean line and just makes for a more professional look. Now it was time to drill hardware holes for my new knobs. I centered them side to side and top to bottom, and then used a punch to mark the spot where the drill would go. Always measure twice and drill once. After vacuuming out the drawers and wiping them down with a tack cloth, I cut all of the drawer liners using my Ulfa Mat and rotary cutter. It's peel and stick, so it was pretty straightforward to put in place. Moving on to the knobs now, I picked these up actually at HomeSense. Saw them, loved them, didn't know what project I'd use them on, and then found that this was the perfect project. I like how they match the tops. These ones install a little bit differently than most. They've just got a little washer and nut on the back that you screw on, so I just chose to tighten it a little bit with a pair of pliers. Over time, these wooden drawer slides can get a bit sticky, so the drawers don't slide as smoothly, so I always just wax them. This is Fusion Beeswax Finish, which is a mix of beeswax and hemp oil. I use it on the slides, and then I also use it on the drawers themselves when it's wood like this. And here's the final look at the nightstands. Dated mahogany, transformed into a sleek, modern set with a cohesive natural wood top and clean lines. I bought these very traditional red nightstands at auction for just under $100. On the way home, I even stopped at Home Depot to buy wood so I could build a new base and modernize them. But in the parking lot, when I was measuring them, I took a look underneath and grabbed my screwdriver because I realized something. I might not need to build a base after all. Once I got them home and took a closer look, I discovered they were actually solid wood Sure-Mag nightstands. So today I'm taking these from well-used, dated, cherry furniture to a much more modern designer look. The first thing I need to do is deal with this base and confirm whether or not my parking lot suspicions were actually valid. That's crazy, because that's exactly what I was going to do to the base, and I was going to make my first ever base, and now I don't have to. I just need to fill those holes. My favorite wood filler is Fama wood. I usually get it in a natural. I'm putting a fairly generous amount of wood filler in here. Let's take a look at this hardware. Now, I may not be super popular because this looks like it's brass hardware, but I do not like this style. I feel it really dates these. I'm going to measure the hole spacing and see what I've got in my hardware stash that might fit. You can see that that's one solid piece. I'm excited to see what we've got going on with this wood here. I'm using Fusion TSP Alternative mixed up in a spray bottle to clean. And this gets rid of any grease and grime and furniture polish, which we don't want to grind into our wood when we're sanding. Okay, I know the sanding sequence is never all that exciting, but let's face it, it takes the most time when you're going down to raw wood. This is 80 grit. I'm hand sanding around the edges. Now I'm using acetone to remove a little bit more of that finish. Now I'm using 80 grit on the top. Then I'm moving to 120 grit, mesh this time. And finally, 180 grit sandpaper. And then everything gets one last hand sand with 180 grit sandpaper. This makes sure that there's no swirl marks and you have a nice, smooth, even finish. Okay, I made you watch 1 minute, but it was really more like at least 2 hours. It's been a few days and now I'm able to get back to working on these nightstands. The next step is dealing with the old hardware holes and getting the surfaces ready for paint. I've decided I'll be using knobs, so we need a really invisible repair where the original pulls were. So first I'll remove the existing hardware and give the drawers a really good clean. I've filled a lot of hardware holes over the years and tried a lot of different products, and this process is the one that consistently leaves no trace of what was there before. First, I fill the holes with Bondo. Bondo is one of my favorite products for this because it dries quickly and sands really nicely. While the Bondo starts to set up, I move on to the rest of the piece. I clean the body of the nightstands and start sanding the base to remove the filled screw holes and any other imperfections left behind from removing that detailed scrolled trim. See how I snuck in a little more sanding work there? Once the Bondo has started to firm up but isn't completely dry, I scrape it back, and then I apply Famo wood filler over top. While the wood filler dries on the drawers, I continue the prep work on the body of the nightstands, sanding a bit more of the base with 180 grit and scuff sanding the rest of the body to get it ready for primer and paint. Once the wood filler is dry, I go back and sand the drawers smooth. And for the final little imperfections, I use a bit of Bondo spot putty, both on the drawers and in a couple small areas on the base. Once that dries, I hand sand those spots smooth and wipe everything down so the surfaces are clean and ready for the next step. Normally, when I seal wood before painting, I apply shellac with a roller, but this time I'm applying it with the spray shellac because I already have it on hand. And this actually works really well, especially getting into those little detailed areas. Cherry is notorious for bleed through, so sealing everything with shellac really helps lock that in before priming. And sealing with shellac is actually the final step to these perfectly smooth filled hardware holes. Once the shellac dries, I lightly hand sand everything with 400 grit sandpaper and then wipe back all the dust. This helps knock down any high spots or small drips, which can happen more easily with spray applications. Once that's done, I move on to primer. In this case, I'm using a black primer. Now, you might be thinking, didn't she already prime with shellac? And the answer is yes. This additional primer isn't strictly necessary. But when you're painting darker colors, it can really help reduce the number of coats of paint that you need. And finally, it's time to move on to paint. I'm using Sherwin-Williams urethane trim enamel, which is honestly one of my favorite paints for furniture. And one of the reasons I like it so much is that it doesn't require a top coat, which is really great with darker colors where top coats can cause them to look streaky. Another nice thing about this paint is that you can custom mix colors. In this case, I actually mixed a mix. I was aiming for more of a green-blue tone, but it ended up leaning a bit more blue-green, which sometimes happens when you're experimenting with color. Normally, I apply this paint with a microfiber roller, but this time I tried using a foam roller, and I actually really liked the way the finish turned out, especially on a piece with a lot of edges and detail.
It's definitely more on the expensive side, but Sherwin-Williams does run sales pretty regularly, so you can usually pick it up at a reduced price if you watch for that. I'm applying 2 coats of paint on the body and do 3 coats on the drawers. Before the final coat of paint on the drawers, though, I drill holes for the new knobs. I measure the center of each drawer, both horizontally and vertically, mark the spot with a punch so the drill bit doesn't wander, and then drill the hole. Drilling before this final coat helps seal the raw edges of the hole with paint so everything looks clean once the hardware is installed. With the paint done, I remove the tape from the wood areas. You'll notice a little bit of shellac sometimes bleeds through the tape line, which can happen when the tape isn't completely sealed. So before moving on, I lightly hand sand those areas to remove any of that shellac. If I left it there, the paint wash and stain wouldn't absorb the same way, and those spots would show up differently in the final finish. Once that's sanded back, the wood is ready for the next step. I've taped off the painted areas to protect them while I work on the wood. And I'm starting with the base first so I can test this process and make sure I'm happy with the color before moving on to the tops. One of the challenges with pieces like this is the strong red undertones in cherry wood. If you just stain over it, that red tends to show through, and it can be difficult to get a more neutral, modern, medium wood tone. So the first step is doing a green wash. Why green? Well, green sits opposite red on the color wheel, so a green wash can help balance the red undertones and make it look more like a neutral brown before you apply a stain. It really doesn't matter which green you use. You can use any green paint and just dilute it with water. With that green wash dry, I start experimenting with stain. My first attempt is a walnut stain and finishing oil. This is a Fusion mineral product. This gives a really rich color, but it ends up being a bit darker than the look I was going for. I'm trying adding a taupe stain and finishing oil, which lightened things up, but pushed it a little too far in the other direction. So to bring it back to the tone I have in mind, I'm adding a natural stain and finishing oil. This helps rebalance everything and lands somewhere right in the middle. I repeat the same process on the tops so everything matches. If you're enjoying this video and finding it helpful, please let me know in the comments and consider giving it a like. It would really help me out. Now that I'm happy with the color, the only thing left to do is go back and repair those screw holes that I left behind when I removed the base. I used Blend-All sticks and then seal those repairs with Perfect Blend. I'm not going to go deep into that process here, but I've shown how I do these repairs in detail on a few other projects, which I'll link in the description. I had this floral wallpaper in my stash, and the blue-green tones and pattern just work really nicely with the paint color and the stained wood. It's a small detail, but opening a drawer and seeing something finished inside just makes the piece feel much more complete somehow. With the liners in place, it's time to install the hardware. I also tried using some hardware from my stash, but the color just wasn't quite right for this piece, so I ended up picking up a new set of knobs instead. With those final touch-ups done and the finish where I want it, it's time to put everything back together. Let's take one last look at the before. And here's how they look now. By simplifying the base, neutralizing the red tones in the wood, and combining paint with a natural wood finish, they now fit much better with today's more modern aesthetic.